journey to Jerusalem. And one of the texts today that we're going to read is one of those important texts. So it is Mark 8, 27 to 38. And I'm reading from the New Revised Standard Version, so you'll see a little bit of different wording. Mark 8, 27 through 38. You're going to recognize this, I think. Jesus went on with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi. And on the way, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" You ever ask anybody, "What's so-and-so think about me?" Tell them I like them. Think they like me? We do that a lot, don't we? Well, Jesus was just trying to get the lowdown on what people were thinking about him. And they answered him, "John the Baptist and others say you're Elijah, and still others say you're one of the prophets." He asked them, "But who do you say that I am?" Peter answered him, "You are the Messiah." And he sternly ordered them not to tell anyone about him. Then he began to teach them that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. That wasn't what they wanted to hear. He said all this quite openly, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and looking at his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." He called the crowd with his disciples and said to them, "If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. For what will it profit them to gain the whole world and forfeit their life? Indeed, what can they give in return for their life? Those who are ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of them the Son of Man will also be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels." May God add his blessing to the reading of his word. What a powerful text. So we're in Lent. Lent is 40 days journey to Calvary. It's a time of preparation, 6 Sundays that the church sets aside to do some soul searching, some spring cleaning, if you will, because we are headed to the most significant event history has ever known. And that's Jesus' death on Calvary and his resurrection. So what Jesus has given the disciples today is what we call in nonprofit world an elevator speech. Now, in nonprofits or business, everybody says you need to be able to say your mission in a very brief time, in a succinct and efficient way. That's your elevator speech, because the theory is that if you're stuck on an elevator for a very brief time, 20 seconds, and somebody says, "Hey, what do you do?" then you have that ready to share in the time that it takes for the elevator to get to whatever floor you're going to. Now, if they're going to the 20th floor, you have a little bit more time. So I have been doing the work with circles for 10 years this year, and I'm telling you, my elevator speech has morphed over time, because what we do is so hard for people to understand that I have crafted and I've got this elevator speech down pat. Now, it doesn't mean that I won't tweak it, continue to tweak it, but here's my elevator speech. Marie, tell me what Circles is. Circles is a national movement to end poverty through relationships by harnessing the power of friendship and community and helping to reduce or remove barriers that keep people back away from getting ahead. That's my circle speech. Sometimes people ask me, well, Marie, tell me about Garden Baptist Church. I'm working on my elevator speech. Garden Baptist Church is a small but mighty American Baptist congregation on the west side of Indianapolis. We want to let people know that they are loved by God and by us, and that they can find a welcoming and loving home church there. And to add Peggy's words, they preach the gospel. Because Peggy always makes sure we say that. We do. So everybody needs to be able to have an elevator speech. When you're asked, now, I probably would have a little bit different elevator speech if somebody says, why are you a Christian? It would be more about, well, I found forgiveness and acceptance and love through Jesus Christ who died on the cross. On the way here this morning, I was listening to, believe it or not, an interview with Alice Cooper on NPR. And he's pretty tame compared to a lot today, but I don't know if you guys know this, but he has returned to his roots. He is a member of an evangelical covenant community. He talked about Jesus as his Savior and Lord on that interview today, and he still looks the same. The long black hair, the black mascara. He still has a lot of theatrics, but very, very much a believer. And his elevator speech, because when that interviewer said, you go to church, don't you? Man, he knew that was his cue to have his elevator speech. And he did it in about 15, 20 seconds. And it was powerful. So what Jesus shares today is what he's really all about. It's what the gospel is all about. And I think that it was hard for the disciples to hear because Peter rebuked him, and they had not accepted or fully realized at this point what Jesus meant, what Messiah meant. They had a different idea of what Messiah was going to mean. So the first 8 chapters of Mark, Mark is writing, he spends the whole 8 chapters talking about Jesus, showing us who Jesus was. We see Jesus at mealtime. We see Jesus healing people. We see Jesus teaching. We see Jesus doing and saying a lot of things. But in this chapter, that end of chapter 8, things shift, and Jesus starts to talk about his journey to Jerusalem. He starts the journey to Calvary, and he starts to talk to the disciples about what it really means for them. And as the story goes, he says in verse 29, what are people saying about me? And I can just imagine the disciples. I'm presupposing that this happened, but can't you imagine this happening? They're looking at each other like, you tell them. You tell them. Well, some say you're Elijah, and some say you're John the Baptist, and some say you're prophets. And they left out, I think, probably the negatives that people were sharing. And then he says, well, who do you think that I am? And you gotta know that those disciples, having followed Jesus around all that time, having seen him and heard him, I mean, when they visualized and caught a glimpse of him healing people and what he did that angered the Pharisees, I mean, don't you imagine they sat around the campfire at night and they said, who is this guy? We're following him, man. Where's this gonna go? And then they had to decide in and of themselves, who do they really think he is? They stuck with him this far. Who do you think that I am? And after a moment, Peter, who seems to be the ringleader, fesses up and he says, the Messiah. Now, I think that when Peter said the Messiah, I think he got it half right. I don't think he was listening. I don't think he had gotten the other part, because Jesus goes on to say some things. And it's clear that Peter wasn't thinking about what Jesus was thinking about. So what do I mean getting it half right? Sometimes we get it half right. I I don't know if there are some people or books or places in Christianity that paint a picture of perfection, of shiny people, shiny, beautiful people who have everything together. And nothing bad happens. And even though my rational mind knows that can't be true, my heart says, oh, I want to be like them. You know, you get on Facebook and you see all the good stuff people put up and you think, wow, my life doesn't look like that. But then occasionally you get to see behind the facade. One of my friends from back home has an incredibly beautiful, huge family that get together all the time, and they make these huge meals, and my heart hurts for being home in the mountains and being around large families. I don't have a large family anymore. They've passed away. And I get this longing, and I kind of got a rude awakening the last time I visited my friend, because she said, you only see the good stuff on Facebook. We really have some problems. And she went on to tell me, they really have some challenges. They really have some serious, serious challenges. So we can't always judge a book by its cover. We can't always judge Christianity by what we see in the press. You know, there's always another story. Whether the story's good or bad, there's two. Jeff is an attorney, and one of the things he learned early on in law is that when you're listening to two different sides of a story, there's truth in both, and that the reality is almost always somewhere in the middle. So sometimes we get led astray because we think, man, we get a little envious. We went down to see Jake and Em on Friday night, and we went to our favorite pizza place, Mother Bear's Pizza. If you're ever in Bloomington, oh my gosh, I love Mother Bear's. So we were sitting there at a table, and we were laughing, and Nathan was doing his thing. He gets so loud and boisterous, and we were sitting there, and the waitress comes up, and she says, I'm sorry your pizza's taking so long. And I said, oh, it's okay. We're just having a great time visiting. She says, oh, you guys are so wholesome. I said, well, thank you. And she walked away, and my kids are like, you know, if she only knew. You know, we're a normal family with our warts and all, you know. But I appreciate her words. There's a story that a seminary friend told about sitting in chapel in seminary. And she said, once while I was in seminary, a well-known preacher came to address the students during the morning chapel time. We gathered expectantly on those wooden pews that had seen a lot of preachers come and go. As we listened, he talked for a long time about his perfect marriage of 35 years and his 5 children, 4 of whom were leading perfect lives. He went on so long that a friend of mine leaned over and said, aren't you just praying that the 5th kid is a Hare Krishna or something? I mean, she was joking, but you know, you're just like, tell me that he doesn't have 5 perfect kids. Is that real? Of course, we don't want them to be Hare Krishna, but I get what she was saying. It's kind of like that same thing, that envy we have, or that false perception sometimes that the world has about Christianity. Brennan Manning is a Christian writer, and he wrote a book a couple decades ago that's pretty famous called The Ragamuffin Gospel. And he says this, I quote, most of the descriptions of the victorious life do not match the reality of my own. Things you read and hear create the impression that once Jesus is acknowledged as Lord, the Christian life becomes a picnic on a green lawn. Marriage blossoms into connubial bliss. Physical health flourishes. Acne disappears. And sinking careers suddenly soar. The victorious life is proclaimed to mean that everyone is a winner. An attractive 25-year-old accepts Jesus and becomes Miss America. A floundering lawyer conquers alcoholism and whips F. Lee Bailey in court. A 10th-round draft choice for the Green Bay Packers goes to the Pro Bowl. Miracles occur, conversations abound, church attendance skyrockets, ruptured relationships get healed, shy people become gregarious, and the St. Louis Cardinals win the World Series. Now, I'm not saying none of that happens. God can make any of that happen. But I'm not saying it happens all the time. It's been my experience more times than not that when somebody comes to Christ, they immediately face temptation and trial. I don't know about you guys, but I do know people who've had immediate healing from smoking and drinking. I mean, that does happen. But I do know an awful lot of people who still struggle. They have Christ's strength, they have Christ with them, but the calories are still there. The desire to drink is still there, but with Christ they're able to overcome. So when we don't get that perfection that we think we see, do we feel like something's missing or that we've not done something right? Are we doing it wrong? No. From this text today, Jesus says there's just a part you're leaving out. It's the struggle. It's the taking up of your burdens and taking up the burdens of the world that give life to faith. Peter has this happy vision of faith, and he can't imagine a Messiah who would willingly suffer and die. For him, that's failure. And when Jesus starts talking about it, Peter pulls him aside and rebukes him. He uses the words that you would use to cast out demons. But Jesus comes right back at him, and he says, "Get behind me, Satan." The same words for casting out a demon. Because Peter had to hear this. Peter had to know this. That we have a clear choice. There is a path. And that choice is taking up our cross. How do we live out our everyday faith? How do we live our core life as a disciple? Who do you say that I am? Jesus asked. Can you follow me? Can you take up your cross? Can you face the burdens of your life? Can you carry the cares of this world? He asks these questions of us. Faith demands that we ask ourselves these things. Does my work use my talent that God gave me? How do I spend my days? Am I raising my kids and seeing that as a way that I am a minister? In my day-to-day work or my volunteer work, does my relationship or do my relationships show the love and grace of God? In the way I talk to my friends, my neighbors, my spouse, my kids, am I talking to the face of God in them? Does my life show evidence of God? Am I growing in some way or have I gotten stuck? Am I stewing in regret? Or am I working to rise above that? Not easy. If I had 3 months to live, what would I want to fit into my life? What really matters and what would Jesus have us do? Where would Jesus have us go? These are the questions we ask when we take up our cross. Can you pick up your cross and follow me? Can you face your life with me in the power of the Spirit and care for the needs of others? One writer, David Goetz, says, "As life picks up speed and I clock more days and weeks and years, I accumulate more suffering. The human tendency seems to be to fight the difficult parts of life, as if by resisting them I can skip to the good stuff or set a few extra goals to overcome suffering. But there's no entry into Christ's presence without the cross. No one has to go looking for one. The cross will find you. Every day I wake up and I'm confronted with people in pain. It's a fact of life. If you're not having trouble right now, like the Indiana weather, be thankful and realize that that will probably change, and that life is a series of challenges and a series of taking up the cross and saying, okay, I'm going to walk through this with the power of God and the power of his cross. Especially when we see that suffering in somebody else's life and what we can do to ease their pain. We can lament that we don't have picture-perfect lives, or we can turn and pick up crosses, pick up the cross of recovery of the ill family member, of inclusion, pick up the cross of chemotherapy with that friend, pick up the cross of getting home in time for family time, pick up the cross of anger management, pick up the cross of learning how to trust when you've been hurt so many times and trust comes hard. Pick up the cross of helping someone with no discernible benefit to you. Pick up the cross of serving someone new that you don't know. Pick up the cross of talking to someone that you disagree with and coming to a connection in Christ. Pick up the cross of having to move deeply in faith. That is the core of our faith, taking up the cross, following Jesus who loves and serves. And that, my friend, is our elevator speech. I follow Jesus who died on the cross, and he says to follow him that I pick up a cross and trust and walk in and through him. That's the essence of our faith. And that's what's on Jesus' business card and when he gives an elevator speech. The answer to the mystery of our faith and the entrance into it is the cross. Lord Jesus, thank you for this lesson